I've had just a few hours here, but it doesn't take very long to get the impression of the devastating damage that occurred here on New Year's Eve. It also doesn't take very long to find out how remarkably supportive, how resilient these soldiers and their families have been, how tremendously reactive the command force and the garrison here have been in taking steps that are necessary to begin the path of recovery and ultimately rebuilding. And to understand, as we see behind me here, the incredible outpouring of support and of humanity that has come from the citizens, both on and equally important in the communities off this post. And we talk a lot in the Army about the Army family, and you can see it in our posters, and you can see it in our literature, and we believe in it very strongly, but it has to be more than a bumper sticker. And if there's anything this experience has shown, is that in times such as this, the Army family knows how to put our arms around each other and begin to build for the future. So more than anything, this has been a story of great tragedy and of potential great loss, and is becoming quickly one of recovery and getting back to the business of being a strong Army family. So I can't say enough about General Phillips and his staff and the folks that have led the recovery effort, and equally had some time to spend with a few of the families, visited the homes that for them used to be the place they lived, and now they've moved on, and talked about how they're getting their lives back together. And I think the people of Missouri can be very, very proud of this Army family, can be proud of themselves and how they've stepped forward, and certainly we in the Army deeply appreciate that kind of outpouring from the community. So I'd be happy to try to respond to any questions. It really took my breath away. From the first moment I received the emails on New Year's Eve about this event, we got a better picture as to how widespread the damage was. I thought I understood it. I've read this, what we call sit reps, the situation reports, and I've seen the pictures, but until I got off the plane and began to tour this, it's really hard to imagine the devastation that occurred here, and that's the realization that as the great engineers here in Leonard Wood have stepped up and done what they have done so well, a great deal has already been recovered, and a lot of steps taken to bring order back into what was once total chaos. But even for all of that, to see what Mother Nature can do at her most height of fury is pretty startling.
Mr. Secretary, as the former chairman of the MWR committee, can you describe what MWR has done here and compare it to other disasters like the situation at Gulfport?
Well, we happen to believe that morale, welfare, and recreation is at the core of recovery. It's at the core of existence. And of course, when you've got young families, we want to make sure we're continuing to provide assistance and the kind of help that you see behind us here. I should give a real tip of the hat to the USO. I can't think of a single moment of crisis, either as it's affected the military, the United States Army, or civilian communities throughout the country, that the USO hasn't in some way found a means by which to step forward and help people with the kinds of basic things you don't think about until you don't have them. Everything from soap to deodorant to cleaning products to clothes, and because of that effort and that partnership, I think we're doing what's necessary to help people get their lives back together. We budget to the extent we try to train for it. And I was talking to some of the garrison command. They, I think, were very uplifted by the fact that when they talk about disaster preparedness, when they have training scenarios for the families as to where you should go, what you should do, you should have a plan, that you always wonder, are they really listening and assimilating? And we put a lot of effort into that. And my judgment would be the training worked. And those were dollars well invested, because we saw in case after case where a family had a plan, they knew where to go after they heard the sirens. They heard one story about the mother and father, two children, the dog, and the goldfish were brought together according to their family plan. So you can budget for that kind of thing, and we'll try to take lessons learned from this as we always do, and try to do even better preparing for the future. But there's no way you can budget for this kind of devastation. And
how much do you think it's going to take, to rebuild?
Well, I think it's clear there's hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of damage here. We've got a back of the envelope figure that's about $500 million plus, but that's very preliminary, and we want to be able to work these figures. And having spent 17 years in Congress, I feel very confident that our overseers in the House and the Senate, certainly the administration, will be very supportive in trying to help us to plug the budget holes that are going to come through this. But right now, we're not worried about the money. We're worried about the people. We can find the resources in the near term to do what we have to do. So this will be a process that will go for some time. But right now, it's about the people.
How does that work? This effort behind you is obviously volunteer. I mean, what role will the U.S. government and the military play in funding, getting these families back on their feet, housing, things of that nature?
Well, housing, we have in excess of 85% of the people who were displaced are already being provided new housing. I've had a chance to talk with 3 or 4 of those families. We do have a few families left, very small in number, who are still in interim housing, basically in motels, hotels, that they're trying to work through and provide them new accommodations that are as good, if not better, than what they lost. As to the personal items, and I think that's always the biggest challenge, that the reality is there have been losses here of a personal nature that you can't replace at any price. But there are things like couches and the kinds of things that most of us think about when we're moving, that we're setting up a process, a claims process, and there's a series of sources of potential help. When the housing, the developer, the RCI developer had housing insurance for possessions on each one of the homes, and that's being taken care of. And next we rely upon any insurance that the individuals may have, and they have in excess, I believe, don't quote me, but the garrison can confirm the figure, of excess of 90% of the homes that were damaged. The folks there had their own private insurance. That'll work its way through. And at the end of the day, we have Army emergency relief assistance that generally is considered up to $100,000 that we will utilize and help the folks work through and trying to make sure we can, if not bring them back to whole, provide everything we possibly can. And we, through the Office of the Adjutant General, has already put in an expedited system for clearing those claims and making sure that we're not tying people up in excessive paperwork and bureaucracy.
Mr. Secretary, you were in Congress when the housing privatization initiative was begun.
I was.
Were there ever considerations of a disaster of this magnitude and how it would affect privatization?
Well, you'd have to ask the developers as to what this may mean to the calculation for them in the future. I can tell you from the congressional side, I was on the Armed Services Committee, I was on the subcommittee that authorized the first RCI projects. We never really contemplated this as an aspect of it. Our challenge, we felt, was recapitalization and providing the kind of housing that through regular Army budgets we weren't going to be able to do. And by and large, it's been a very positive experience. And the RCI developer here, by every account that I've received, has stepped forward in an amazing way and has done everything reasonably possible to assist their homeowners and to make sure that we're doing the right thing by those soldiers and their families.
Have you had any contact with people from Fort Leonard about what they plan to do?
I have not personally, but again, in talking to General Phillips, talking to the garrison commander here, those folks have said that Fort Leonard has stepped forward and have done a great job and are really being forward-leaning and providing every possible assistance. And as they described it to me, they couldn't reasonably expect them to do a single thing more. So at least the initial reports are they've performed very, very well.
On the issue of rebuilding, has there been any time frame discussed for what it would take to get the fort back to where it was?
Well, you have a sequence of priorities. Clearly, there's some important things that happen here in the engineering school, et cetera, and those kinds of things where you have regular cycles of training have to be priority number one in terms of normalizing the base activities. That's apart from the housing and such. So base will prioritize its rehabilitation reconstruction project, and we'll just try to work through it. One of the glass half full aspects of this, as I said earlier, you got a lot of engineers on this base, and we're trying to turn this into a teachable training moment as well. So try to make lemonade out of lemons when you can. Sir. I was here to try to assess what the garrison and what the families felt maybe they needed that they weren't getting. And by every reaction I've received so far, that is being provided. I think what we see over time is that disasters tend to have a moment of spotlight, and then the folks who are most affected by them are over time left to deal for themselves more and more as we get further from the event. I want to make sure they understand that we want to be there for them as long as they have a need. And as I said, you can't get mad at us, and you can't complain unless you give us a chance to fail. And by that I mean you got to let us know what you need, and we'll do everything we can to provide it, whether it's today, tomorrow, or into the future. And if we fail, it won't be because we weren't concerned and we didn't make the effort. And it's just to let them know that this is not just a great garrison responding adequately in very supportive communities, even though it's all of that. This is us back in Washington understanding how important this is and what a great tragedy they've experienced, and we're going to be there for them.
Regarding Washington, that chain of command, where does your report go, sir?
Well, I'm the civilian head of the United States Army, so from the Army perspective, it stays with me unless I have to direct it elsewhere. I had a meeting with the Secretary of Defense this morning, and the first item I talked about was my pending visit here. The Secretary, as he always has been, is very concerned about the welfare of soldiers and their families, military men and women in uniform. And I will, of course, report back to him as to the status. But I just want to make sure the Army and the Army resources are being made available here, and I, for the moment, feel pretty good about that.
We have time for one more question.
How do you go about making sure this doesn't interrupt the mission of Fort Leonard Wood as far as training personnel for theater?
Well, I talked to the garrison leaders. I just spent some time with the colonel who's the head of the engineering effort here, the training, and they feel that they're going to not be adversely affected. The engineer school turns through about 20,000 soldiers here a year, and they don't see that being diminished at all. Look, the Army's got a great can-do attitude. That's wonderful. We always rely upon it, but here it's not just an attitude, it's an action. And I feel very confident talking to them. They're gonna make it all work. So thanks all for coming out. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Secretary.